In some historic news, Vince McMahon is selling the remainder of his WWE TKO stock, meaning for the first time since the 1980s, Vince McMahon will own no part of WWE. I'm going to tell you what this means, and I'm also going to tell you why people believe that this could be the start of a new venture for McMahon, potentially in professional wrestling. Is he going to start a new company? I'll tell you everything we know about that so far. We're also going to be talking about Kenny Omega, some comments he made about CM Punk, The Elite, AEW, and the entire Brawl Out situation, marking really the first time we've heard any insight from some people who were directly in the room in that event. So much to come in this video. Be sure to smack that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. All right, let's talk about it. Vince McMahon, who obviously has been embroiled in this lawsuit that we've covered on the channel, the Janelle Grant suit that has basically led to the ousting and erasure of him from WWE TV. Well, ever since things ramped up there, we have heard McMahon kind of sell his TKO stock, or heard of reports that McMahon has sold TKO stock. And the most recent filing from TKO and the SEC shows that McMahon is listing the remainder of his shares for sale. He has made a few massive sales recently, and this seems to be the final one he will make. This is according to WrestleNomics, who broke this situation down. Vince McMahon's remaining TKO shares aren't sold yet, but are registered for sale. That doesn't necessarily mean he'll be selling all of his remaining shares in the parent company of WWE, but it might. Additionally, 234,424 shares held by WWE President Nick Khan, and another 3,508 shares held by TKO board member Steve Koonin are also registered for sale. So, as of the previous sale that actually went through, McMahon owned about 4.7% stake in TKO, WWE, UFC, all that kind of stuff. It looks to be the case that McMahon has been offloading the shares and in order to get, as much funds as possible. That just seems to be the pattern we've seen. There's no reason, I think, given what has happened over the past number of months and the background of it, and also just McMahon's pattern of selling as many shares as possible and getting the profits from that. There's no reason to believe that he won't just sell all of these at some point. It's going to happen, and looks like it's going to happen sometime relatively soon. And if and when it does, it will mark the first time since McMahon took over the company in the mid-1980s from his father, Vince McMahon Sr., that VKM Jr. will not own any part of WWE. He has effectively been out of the company for the past number of months. Even before the Janelle Grant lawsuit went into play, he was basically taken out of any position of authority over WWE by Ari Emanuel and Endeavor. And that basically rendered him as a figurehead mostly. And then obviously when the Janelle Grant lawsuit was filed, shortly after that, McMahon was essentially just taken, history taken away, erased, and probably for good reason. And look, there's going to be a lot of people who are like, McMahon did nothing wrong, McMahon is until proven guilty. If you read through the lawsuit and if you break it down, if you look at the updates, there are some shocking, vile, and disgusting things that were done and said in there that I think anyone who takes the time to read through that lawsuit and the subsequent investigations and reports about it, it is hard to defend at least some, if not any, of the actions that are alleged in there. But obviously, the sheer amount of shares that McMahon has been selling, given the fact that he only owns 4.7% now, and he's going to be selling all those, have led people to believe that McMahon may be putting this money towards a new venture. He is someone who, is no spring chicken. We all know that Vince McMahon, even before the sale of TKO, was someone who had his eye on his legacy. He is someone who, at this point, people have always been saying, like, what does he have to live for? What does he have to live for? This is someone who we all believed at one point would die in the chair. He would be in WWE as the chairman, as the head writer, as everything until he died. That didn't happen due to obvious reasons. He's still 78 years old. He, I think, is probably more full of ambition than ever, just given the fact that in his view, not mine, in his view, you know, this thing that he had built for however long, WWE, has, is out of his control. And number two was kind of, in his view, taken away from him beforehand. And we know how Vince, and if you know anything about Vince McMahon, you know for damn sure he is a stubborn bastard. He's a stubborn bastard. He is someone who, regardless of how terrible he looks, I think, regardless about how people view him, he's someone who wants to be out there and wants to be doing something. He wants to be active. There's a reason why back in 2022, when he did retire, there's a reason why he ended up coming back. He couldn't help himself. That's just the truth. He couldn't help himself. So to me, there's no reason to believe that Vince wouldn't do something. The question really is, what is it? And if we take a look at, Vince's history, I think that it's possible that he could start a new wrestling company. I don't see it happening for a multitude of reasons. Number one being that if you look at the trajectory of WWE, TKO, profits, all that kind of stuff, it's very obvious to see that for a while there, WWE were kind of succeeding on their laurels. And McMahon's booking, the product itself, was not good. And that all happened under McMahon. Some of the worst years booking-wise in the company's history happened under McMahon. And especially recently, I should say. Because obviously he had his peak there in the Attitude Era. And the Golden Era in the early 90s, late 80s. There's no doubt about that. But from a business standpoint, WWE was essentially only reaching the heights that they were because of the name value that they had built up over the years. It's like no matter how incompetent leadership at Disney is, or no matter how incompetent the storylines in Marvel are, they're going to succeed to a point for sure. The issue is, though, if you look at where WWE is today, not just from a storyline standpoint, but factor that in and look at how that correlates with where the business side is, where the buzz about the business is, where the word of mouth about WWE is, it's night and day. Triple H is maximizing WWE in a way that Vince McMahon couldn't. TKO are maximizing WWE in a way that Vince McMahon couldn't. And that weighs him down significantly. But it doesn't weigh him down as much as this lawsuit. This lawsuit has made him persona non grata, I think, in every boardroom he could try to get in. There are going to be some people who will take a meeting with him for sure, if he were to go that route. I don't, however, see a major network greenlighting a show and putting money behind a show and time behind a show that has this level of potential bad PR around it. I just don't see it. The risk is not worth the reward. And, it's not just from a booking standpoint. We know that there are other people who have reached out to Janelle Grant's lawyer. It's been reported. She said this, confirmed this, about the culture in WWE. We know that Vince has multiple other NDAs. We know that there are other allegations going back to Rita Chatterton. And in the way that I view things, it would be very difficult to see any partner or any potential partner, greenlighting a project, like a TV project, which would be the only way that a wrestling company could be successful. As far as the degree Vince would want it, right? He's in TV. He's in the entertainment business. I just don't see it happening. Now, will he try to maybe do something with like football? Will he try to do something outside of that? Because there's also a side of McMahon that has wanted to be viewed by his peers and by the public at large as legitimate, quote unquote. And I'm sure that he will try at least that. But you're going to run into the same issues. How many people would want to do business with someone who is accused of and has sent the text messages like Vince McMahon has sent that are all public? How many people are going to want to do business with that person? How many people are going to want to do business with someone who, at the very least, we know for damn sure, it's confirmed that he had a he developed, a very toxic culture in WWE. How many people are going to want to do business with Vince McMahon, someone who has all the baggage in the world, for a project that may not be successful, behind a leader who has the baggage, but also the horrible reputation as a creative mind in recent years that Vince McMahon has? I don't think anyone will. Will he try? Perhaps. We all know money can change things very quickly, and, well, Vince already has a whole lot of money, and he's going to get a whole lot more after this sale goes through. But we'll see. Let me know what you guys think about that in the comments section as we move on to our next topic here. Of course, it's another news video. We had to talk about CM Punk, but this time we're going to be talking about Kenny Omega, actually. So for those of you who don't know, Kenny Omega has taken up streaming, and on a recent stream, he actually discussed the Brawl Out incident in, I think, the most detail that anyone who was involved in the incident has ever really divulged. Of course, CM Punk mentioned it a little bit. He didn't really mention the fight too much. He mentioned the incident that preceded that, the press conference, and that was really the closest we got. But Kenny Omega, at the very least, kind of shed some light into his perspective on the incident and also his views on fighting and wrestling in general. But this clip has been going viral online. I'm going to play the audio. Let's take a listen.
I thought my duty as an EVP during Brawl Out would be to enter the situation while there was chaos, de-escalate it, and create a peaceful environment for everyone. I was able to create a peaceful environment for the most important person in that altercation, and that was Larry. And I swear to God, honestly, that was my biggest. And yeah, it sounds funny, but like, I look at animals and our pets as people, and as, Gabi, of course, one of the most important people in my life. So to get little Larry out of there was the most important thing to me, and that was the success. Unfortunately, try as I may, things were too chaotic for me to be able to do anything by my own power. That was a moment when I had seen that there were... Good call. I believe it was in that instance when I realized that the way that I wanted to go about things wasn't necessarily the way that other people wanted to. It was also the way that other people necessarily didn't want to. And then it was also maybe not the way that the boss wanted to take care of it. And I also thought of myself as a liability because I don't want to say old school. I'm not old school. I've just played a lot of contact sports, and I've gotten into jiu-jitsu and boxing and mixed martial arts. I just know that sometimes when you perform or when you fight, when everything's on the line, when you give your heart, when you give your soul towards something, and you're in that moment of high stress or high anxiety, where you've maybe emptied the tank and you're just physically exhausted. That was actually very impressive. A good punish. Yeah. When in an environment like that, sometimes emotions get the best of you and people will want to throw hands. And in the case, and I'm unfortunately or fortunately a believer of it, I think if it's decided that, hey, this is the best way to solve things and you can shake hands after and move on after, I'm a believer. I'm actually a believer of fighting. I am, and it sounds terrible to say, and which is why, like, don't make me an EVP in 2024. You can't do that stuff anymore. I just feel that sometimes that's how you have to settle things. Sometimes, and I don't mean you have to settle it and then it has to be shown on screen to everyone, or people have to brag online about who won, who lost. No, like, it's not for that purpose. It's for the purpose of just getting that stuff out that you need to get out. And I mean, I'll admit there were a number of times even now with me where I thought that might have been the most appropriate answer. It never came to that. And we were able to talk things out, and we became better friends, and there was a level of respect at that point on between myself and these other parties. And maybe I'll share these stories later. It's but I always it's crazy. As much as I believe in cooler heads prevailing, sitting down and talking, sometimes it was just like, hey, I can't even think straight until I start throwing some hay, you know, and or maybe that I need to be smacked around a little bit, whatever the case might be.
So that was obviously Kenny Omega, EVP of AEW, helped found the company, and he shed some light first on the All Out situation, then his kind of views on kind of managing conflict in certain situations. Let's hit on the All Out incident, right? We had heard reports when All Out happened that essentially the way things broke down, regardless of who you believe, were Kenny Omega, the Bucks, and Mega Prakash, who was, I should say, the chief legal officer of All Elite Wrestling at the time. They came into CM Punk's room after the presser where he buried the company. They came in, and whatever happened, and a fight broke out. And one of the few things that everyone agreed on was that Kenny Omega went in to save, and I mean save, like Larry the dog is a very small dog. There was a lot of commotion, people moving around, people fighting in a relatively compact environment. It's a locker room for one person. See, that essentially Kenny Omega was there to get Larry out and into safety, and to make sure that Larry, the dog, did not get hurt. That's CM Punk's dog. And, Kenny Omega seems to be coming out of this as like, one of the best person, really. And what do you get for it? A steel bit him. It is what it is. But this was, and I think he also touched on it in that next part when he talked about fighting, when he said that, the way he wanted to handle things wasn't necessarily the way others wanted to. And I think it's clear that who he was referring to. He's referring to his best friends in the Young Bucks, who it has been reported were one of the big hang-ups in this whole thing between Punk and the Elite actually meeting to solve things. And it's an interesting point because part of me has always been consistent with this. At a certain point, regardless of how you feel about things needed to be talked out. And I blame Tony Khan a great deal for, not for letting it get to the point and not sitting people down in a room. But at the same time, there is also responsibility on Phil Brooks, as I've said before. There's responsibility on Matt and Nick Jackson. And everyone else who was involved in this incident that was like changed the trajectory of AEW. There's no doubt about that. The entire vibe of the company has been different since then. It's just truth. But Kenny Omega saying that, I think, has given us the most insight from a party that's people are gonna say, oh, he's all elite, he's very good friends with the Young Bucks, and that's not gonna change anytime soon. But he's also someone who has a good rapport with Punk. In the same stream at a later point, he mentioned how after Brawl Out, him Punk, were cool. And the Punk, it's always been reported that Punk never had a problem with Kenny. That the problem was with his perceived slights against Matt and Nick Jackson. So, again, Omega, and this might be the most we ever hear anyone really talk about it, or the most we hear people talk about it in any time soon, because obviously there were NDAs that were signed by all parties there. But man, it is interesting to hear that. And I mean, did Kenny kind of say hey, Matt and Nick Jackson handled it wrong? Maybe he did, and maybe he implied it, and maybe that's what he was trying to say. It's very well possible, and who can blame him? At the end of the day, right? You control what you can control, and to an extent, the Young Bucks could control meeting with CM Punk. They couldn't control what he did afterwards, which was essentially alienate himself to the maximum degree to them and kind of annoy them to the maximum degree and alienate parts of the locker room for sure. But at a certain point, like if they wanted to figure things out, they could have. And whether or not they wanted to and they were entitled to not wanting to is a whole different conversation. But I think that's kind of what it was getting at. And that's not saying like him burying the Young Bucks. I don't think. I think it's just him sharing a perspective. Sometimes we don't agree with our friends. That's okay. The other part that he talked about was like, and this is the part that has everyone like going online, like, it's like, don't make me an EVP in 2024. And people are like, oh, Kenny Omega doesn't want to be an EVP. And the context in which he said that, right, was that he believes that sometimes fighting can be a good thing. That sometimes, like a little bit of toxic masculinity ain't that bad. That like sometimes you just need to fight things out, and like afterwards you'll figure it out, you'll get it out of your system, you'll be fine. And I'm not gonna say I wholeheartedly disagree with him because I don't, and I see where he's coming from mainly. Like I see where he's coming from in that there are some times where in the heat of the moment, passions get high stress environment, sometimes things happen. And that's understood. That's understanding. That's gone. And when parties work it out, and when it's just that, it happens. Okay. The issue is when it becomes a pattern, when it happens multiple times, when it's indicative of a larger problem. Which is why you want to try to not incentivize that kind of stuff as much as possible and root it out, honestly. Like at the end of the day, he's right in this. Probably shouldn't be an EVP if he leaves that in 2024 because we should want better. We need to have better and more constructive ways of figuring things out. That's not me saying that like, oh, just because someone gets into a fight, everyone needs to be fired in wrestling. But your number one option should be to try to work things out and talk things out. And he even said, like, yeah, like, I would rather do that. But it is interesting. It's for sure interesting. And I think that, like, the biggest takeaway overall, I think that, like, everyone's taking away from this is, like, Kenny doesn't want to be an EVP. And, he hates the Young Bucks. I was like, no. If he hated the Young Bucks, I think we would have known well before right now. That is certainly not the case. But, Kenny Omega sharing his perspective. I do think, like, just from a personal standpoint, I know obviously Kenny's been dealing with diverticulitis. We are hopeful that he will, eventually return as fans. But it's really cool to see him do the Switch thing. It's really taken off for him. And, Kenny Omega content is always Real Take certified. Shout out to Kenny Omega. Get well soon, my friend. Guys, be sure to smack that like button, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Let me know what you guys think about this whole Kenny Omega, CM Punk situation. And until next time, be happy, be healthy, and as always, keep it real.